It's time for this week's Economy Matters with Christoph Schumacher. Christoph, natural disasters have changed the game once again.
Yes, certainly have. Every time I think I've got a good topic to write about, something dramatic happens which takes priority. And again, it was exactly the same case this month.
And you're concluding that you can never quite plan for these natural disasters in an economic sense.
No, we can't. It would be great if we could. But again, also that famous quote that economists have predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions is exactly down that track, that it's quite an unpredictable thing.
What are we likely to see then from Cyclone Gabriel?
Well, first of all, it will hit our GDP and our growth rate, and that's bad because we're already talking about recession. The predictions were that our economic growth will be slowing down, and it will hit inflation. And again, we're already operating in a high inflation environment, so double factor here, which we weren't hoping for really.
You've pinpointed places like Northern Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay, which contribute a lot to our export revenues. What's going to happen there, especially for primary produce?
Yeah, and that's actually a real concern. We are not the biggest exporter in the world, but about 70% of our exports come from the primary sector, and there has been a lot of destruction. So we will see a reduction in our exports, but also the impact it will have on New Zealand itself, because food prices will inevitably go up. And we've already heard that some kumaras, for example, are probably going to be scarce this year because simply land has been destroyed, crops have been destroyed. That's not that easy to fix.
Well, how long will this inflationary pressure last?
Well, academic research suggests that possibly about 6 to 8 months before natural disaster inflation-driven events subside. But given the severity of the impact on the primary effect, it might just take a little bit longer here in New Zealand.
What about in terms of the economic growth for affected regions? What's going to play out there?
Well, we see a reduction in GDP simply because production factors have been destroyed, infrastructure has been destroyed. But again, the overall impact might be reasonably small because the cost of rebuilding will add to the GDP. And we've seen this with the Christchurch earthquake, that it contributed to GDP growth for several years to come. So an expectation is that it's a minor reduction in our growth rate because the activity for rebuild will compensate for the loss of productivity.
The reality is that there will be further setbacks for the economy as more of these climate events happen, though.
Absolutely. And we see this all over the world. The US had about 22 cyclone events last year, costing billions and billions. And as we go on, we are expecting more of these kind of disasters to happen.
How can the country become more resilient then?
Well, a real damage to the economy is sort of the opportunities we lose by simply rebuilding things rather than developing new things. So I think the country needs to switch in a completely different mode by not just rebuilding infrastructures and production factors, but thinking ahead so we can future-proof and actually develop and improve what we have rather than simply just focusing on a rebuild.
And you've described that as a build better approach. What is that?
Well, we've heard, and a lot of information came through, that decisions had been made in the past that were suboptimal. We have built at places where we shouldn't have built. We allowed things to happen that caused more damage. So let's hope we learn from this and not just rebuild at places where we see the destruction, but try to come up with better solutions for the future.
So that means moving away from affected regions or coastlines, things like that.
Possibly, yes. And that will raise larger issues on how and who will compensate people who are affected, industries that are affected in that region. But it can't possibly be that we just rebuild and hope that there will not be another disaster in the near future.
And how will that help the economy in the long term?
Well, it will help if we future-proof these developments so that we are more resilient and then can increase output and maybe take some leadership as well. New Zealand is a great place with a lot of ingenuity happening, smart people around. We need to extract this in order to maybe move ahead and become an example of how to build better.
Well, Christoph Schumacher, thanks for your time.
You're most welcome.